evening and welcome to Surrey Police Live. My name is Sophie Argent and I work in the Corporate Communications Department here, and I will be your host for this evening's episode, which is all about rural crime. I'm going to go to our various panel members and let them introduce themselves to you, and then we're going to talk about rural crime. So if I can go first of all to my left to Holly, if you introduce yourself to the camera.
Good evening everyone, my name's Holly. I'm one of the two rural crime officers for Surrey Police.
Hi, I'm Michael Hodder, the Chief Inspector and lead for rural matters with Surrey Police.
I'm Romy Jackson, I'm the County Advisor for Sussex and Surrey, working for the National Farmers Union.
We'll be with you for the next hour talking about rural crime and answering your questions. Please do drop them in the comments below. Our colleagues will be sending those over to us throughout the hour so that we can answer everything you might want to know about the rural crime in Surrey. So I think probably the best thing we should start with is, what is rural crime? Because we all know this sort of thing, we talk about it all the time, we're very boring people, but you may not know at home. So if I can ask Holly to start with, what is rural crime to you? Because it's quite a broad term and it covers a lot of offences. So to somebody at home who isn't aware, what is rural crime?
So rural crime covers many different types of offences. So they can be normal offences, for example criminal damage and theft that happen at a location like farmer's property, or they can be the more specific offences, for example poaching, hare coursing and things like that.
Mike, do you have anything to add?
Well, rural crime is wide and varied and will affect everybody differently. So what we perceive as rural crime might be completely different to a landowner or a farmer. So we have a criteria, but we understand that everybody's perception of crime is different.
That's why we're really pleased to have Romy with us this evening, because you can offer the perspective of landowners and farmers rather than just our police sort of point of view and how that affects people and what rural crime means to the members of the public. So rural crime itself falls into about 4 different categories, as Holly and Mike have mentioned. Agricultural, so you might get theft of fuel or plant machinery; livestock worrying; equine, so theft of tack, and offences at stables and equestrian centres; wildlife, so relating to hare coursing and poaching; offences relating to protected species; and maybe heritage crime, which is a little more unusual, but we do have quite a few heritage buildings in Surrey, so it's damage to ancient monuments, illegal metal detecting, things like that. And also environmental crime can fall into this category, which covers fly tipping and illegal waste dumping. So we'll be taking questions, like I said, throughout the hour. If your question relates to something specific, an investigation that you want an update on, we probably won't be able to answer that here because there may be data protection issues. So please drop any crime reference numbers and your contact details in the comment box, and we will get back to you after the hour and go into more detail with you there. So I think we'll probably start with our first video for the evening, which has our second rural PC, Laura, talking to you about livestock worrying. This is a topic we're going to be covering in quite a bit of detail to start with this evening, because it's something we've seen an increase in recently in Surrey. So I'll hand over to Laura.
The National Police Chiefs Council have recently run a report on livestock worrying, which highlights the scale of dog attacks on livestock and the challenges faced by police. In this report, we welcome recommendations from the working group, who talk about clearer definitions for what livestock is and having dogs under close control. We are also encouraged with the recommendations regarding crime classification and sentencing changes. As Surrey Police's Wildlife and Rural Crime Coordinator, I help advise officers and staff on what livestock worrying is and, most importantly, how we can help prevent it from happening. The loss of livestock is not only financially damaging, but is also incredibly distressing for the owners. When a dog is no longer under control, it can very quickly become a danger to livestock. It can also, however, be a danger in itself. A farmer who believes their livestock is at risk is legally allowed to shoot a dog distressing or harming their animals. We want to make sure we help keep livestock and dogs alike safe and for you to enjoy the countryside. Walking your dog is a great way to take advantage of Surrey's beautiful surroundings, but please do ensure your dog is under control at all times. Keep it on a lead when near livestock, and if it is aggravated or upset around them, walk it away from the animals. If you own livestock, make sure you have clear signs at entrance points, notifying dog walkers that there is livestock in the field. If you witness or are a victim of livestock worrying in progress, please call us immediately on 999. If you are reporting it after the incident has occurred, please call us on 101.
So as you saw in that first video, that is our definition of livestock worrying and how the sort of police define it. In terms of investigating, I'd like to sort of turn to Mike and Holly because we do have some challenges around livestock worrying and the perception of whether or not police will attend every incident of livestock worrying and how the police investigate livestock worrying. So Holly, would you be able to talk us through what happens when we receive a call to an incident of livestock worrying?
Yeah, of course. So when we receive a call of livestock worrying, there's a couple of different factors that will be taken into account. If the dog or owner suspect is still on scene, we will probably be trying to attend as much as we can, depending on resources that we have. If the dog and or suspect aren't on scene, then it may be something that we deal with slow time. As the police and Mr. Hodder will go into more detail, we deal with threat, harm and risk at the time. So that's how we evaluate whether we're attending at the time or at a later date. I don't know if you want to elaborate.
Really important that we recognise and understand the impact that this has on livestock and for the farmers. As we hopefully are aware that your dog might well be well trained and you think being off the lead is fine. But if they see another animal, they are instinctively potentially going to chase that animal, even just to play. So it's about just thinking ahead, and putting your dog on a lead just because they don't normally go on a lead is actually quite sensible, because then you don't put yourself in a difficult position of having to chase your dog and worry about the impact it's had on any livestock. So as Holly said, we will attend if that person is still there with the dog and the landowner or farmer needs some assistance. Of course, the difficulty is that if it's reported later on, there really is no requirement for us to attend what is in essence an empty field, unless there's something to do with the livestock that we need to capture from an evidential point of view. So there is that difficult balance about when to report and when we will go to the scene. But I encourage you to report it nevertheless, because we will still follow it up.
So this may be a bit, I want to come to you, Romy, because there may be a bit of a disconnect between our sort of police approach to livestock worrying and reports of it and what farmers and landowners might expect. So I don't know if you're able to sort of talk through what those kind of perceptions are.
Yeah, we know that livestock worrying and rural crime in general is really badly underreported. Often farmers, as Michael said, will return after the incident to essentially an empty field, and there'll be no evidence to suggest who the offender was on that occasion. But the NFU, we really encourage farmers to report all rural crime and all livestock worrying evidence and cases, so that we can build up a full picture of the scale of the problem. And often dogs off leads, they can have wider implications beyond the immediate attack. They can cause worry to the other animals in that group, which can lead to subsequent loss of pregnancies or health problems later on, which aren't immediately identifiable. And if the case hasn't been reported at the time of the incident, it can be really difficult to prove that those two things are linked.
So that's, I think, one of the problems as well is that there's a concern around obtaining evidence of livestock worrying. So we've had in the past obviously distraught farmers and landowners calling in and asking us to come and obtain perhaps DNA evidence from a scene, which isn't necessarily something we would do, especially if there's a difficulty with identifying the dog or the owner involved. So in terms of managing the expectations of the public, what would you both advise in terms of how we go about doing these things? So in terms of a follow-up visit, I know you've mentioned before that an officer may not necessarily go out straight away to take a report, but we have rural PCSOs who would definitely attend later on to conduct a follow-up visit and speak to you in more detail.
And just to echo that, we have 11 rural PCSOs, one for each borough. And what we ask of them for our rural community is to provide what we call a golden service. So we understand and recognise that our rural victims are often quite vulnerable because of their location or being repeat victims. So we want them to have that special service. We want our rural PCSOs to attend the locations, speak to you guys, educate, see whether we can assist with any signage, help with anything like that, and ensure that they do speak to you after each occasion, even if we don't have a suspect and can't take it further.
So I think it's probably a good time to address the question that comes up quite a lot for us, is that why don't you have a dedicated rural crime team? Because different forces have different resources available to them to investigate rural crime, and in Surrey we have Holly and we have Laura, who you saw in our videos, and they are rural PCs, and if you just have a quick chat about what your role is, Holly, and what exactly you do. And we also have 11 rural PCSOs, but we'll go into that in more detail in a second. So.
Sure. So my role as one of the rural crime officers is to look at the bigger picture of rural crime in Surrey, and then write policies if there's a gap in our policy, to make sure that we're dealing with all the rural crime that we can. And also to advise our officers, our bobbies on the beat, how to investigate, what legislation it is, to educate the teams that may be investigating the crimes, and just to be a general support overall. I don't know if you want to...
The real big key for us is that I recognise that in our region, we're probably the smallest rural crime team. I know Kent are very large, Thames Valley and Hampshire and Sussex do invest in their rural crime teams. The good thing for Surrey is that the Chief Constable is absolutely on board with rural crime and ensuring that we can get the resources. And we are going to be recruiting a further rural full-time police constable to assist Holly and Laura. What I would like to know, though, I think from the NFU, because there is a discrepancy around the region, is just how it's viewed, really, because that's an important factor for us and our response.
So across the region, as you pointed out, there are different levels and different size rural crime teams. The thing that the NFU are really keen is that the police understand the issues that farmers are facing, and if Surrey have chosen to deliver that understanding in a slightly different format, as long as farmers receive a visit when it's needed and there are resources available to prosecute these crimes, and that these crimes and the severity of them and the impact they have on farming businesses is understood by the police force, then that's the most important thing to us.
Mm-hmm. And just to echo that as well, if you feel that you haven't received the service that you should have, or if you've reported a crime and you've been told that it's not a crime, anything like that, either contact myself or Laura. You can do that via 101 or all the reporting services, or you can speak to NFU and you can pass those details on to us, so we can look into it and evaluate that service that you have received to work out whether we have made a mistake or whether we can improve in any way.
I think we probably just need to be a bit open and honest that we have not delivered the best service in previous years, and we recognise that there might be a disconnect still between us as law enforcement and our rural community. So we would encourage, and I know hopefully the NFU would support, we would encourage that reporting to increase. We want to know what's going on in the community and what affects the rural community especially, so that we can at least understand it and, as the NFU have said, deliver our response accordingly.
Absolutely. Our team can be a bit smaller than you might find in other forces, but I can testify to the fact that Laura and Holly and our PCSOs are so incredibly passionate about what they do. If you receive a visit from them or contact from them, they really do care about the issues you're reporting, and they want to do their very best by you. There is a rural PCSO attached to each borough around Surrey, and they do follow-up visits with repeat victims of rural crime. We're starting to do more events, so sort of saddle marking events and other sort of more public-facing events where they can have the chance to meet with you and discuss the things that are concerning you in the community. So And we will make sure that contact details are kind of available for you at the end of this chat. But yeah, please do make the most of them when you can, because they are really, whatever your experiences might have been previously, these guys are very keen and very knowledgeable on this topic and will do all they can to help you with it. And if you do have concerns in terms of resourcing and you think that there's not enough funding, you think there's not enough officers dealing with rural crime in Surrey, then we would encourage you to pass that on to your elected officials, because there's only so much influence that we hold ourselves, and it's something that you need to sort of escalate to people a bit above us, I'm afraid. Before we go to our next video, we'll just go through another question that we commonly get, which is, I reported a rural crime to the police, why haven't you attended? And we have kind of covered this a little bit already, and I think Mike and Holly have spoken about the sort of threat, harm, risk assessment that is carried out when we receive a report of a rural crime. But yeah, no, is there anything more to sort of go into on that in terms of how a call is triaged and attendance?
I think it's probably important to recognise that we don't dismiss a report easily. Like any service, there are limited resources to deal with what we need to deal with. So that mention of threat, harm and risk is about what's the immediate threat and who is at harm. And there's just a balance about where we use our resources. If you haven't received a visit or a police officer at the time of call, doesn't mean that it's any less impactful on you or that we don't take it seriously. It's just our resources might not be able to assist at that particular moment in time. But what you should get is a follow-up visit by, in the rural side of things, one of our rural police community support officers, or indeed Holly or Laura, who are our dedicated rural police officers.
That's great. So we'll go to our next video now. All our videos relate to livestock worrying, but we are taking questions on any rural topic you might have. The second one is with Graham Hall, who I believe is quite popular on Channel 5 as a dog trainer, and he's talking about livestock worrying more from the perspective of dog owners. So enjoy.
Sheep worrying has always been quite a big problem, and I think there's a real feeling that it's on the increase. So I've come to a farm in Warwickshire to find out more. Sit. Good girl. I think there's a bit of a problem with the term sheep worrying, because we just think worrying, well, that's not very much, you know. Or we alternatively, we say sheep attacks, and then perhaps I think people are inclined to think, well, no, actually my little fluffy poo could never possibly attack a sheep. But it doesn't need for a dog to attack a sheep in order to kill them. They actually get stressed out, their hearts give out, even when a dog's just running after them, just in their dog's mind, to play.
The laws around sheep worrying are pretty straightforward actually. The offence happens when a sheep's injured by a dog,
Yep.
The dog's out of control in the field, or the dog's chasing sheep.
You'd be amazed how quickly your dog could run after some sheep. You couldn't catch them. Usain Bolt's 100-metre record was 9.58 seconds. A dog can do that in about 5. So I don't know about you, but I don't think I'd be that quick. I think the answer is pretty clear, isn't it? Keep your dog on a short lead if you're anywhere near sheep.
So I think that video is really interesting to look at livestock worrying from a dog owner's point of view. So as Graham mentioned, your dog might be perfectly well behaved, you've never had a problem with them in your life before, and then it's just something within a dog's nature. They go out, they see sheep, they might get a bit excited and chase them, and it can cause such distress to the sheep. Sheep in particular, although lots of animals come under livestock, and I can do a quiz round if you like and see how many categories of livestock everyone in this panel can get. So I should give you a second. But sheep in particular are very delicate animals, and they can be very easily affected by livestock worrying, especially if they're carrying, as Romy's already mentioned, if they're carrying lambs at the time, they might abort them, they may actually die from the shock themselves. But as I said, it's not just sheep, it is also open to the floor. What other animals can be affected by livestock worrying?
I think that the important off-camera we were talking about is nesting birds and such like, Romy. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that might be something that you want to cover that's wider than what we non-farmers would think of.
Yeah, so it's not under livestock worrying as such, but it is a byproduct of dogs off leads on farms. farmers do quite a lot of work to create habitats and environments that encourage particular species of birds, and particularly ground nesting birds. And an area that is heavily walked, or where a dog may walk off lead, that can really disturb those birds and have a negative impact on their likelihood of them returning. And some of those ground nesting birds are quite endangered, and it's disappointing and frustrating for farmers to have gone to great lengths to create this perfect environment for those birds to have it essentially ruined from dogs off leads. And often you also don't know if the livestock are in an adjoining or even a further away field. And we do get cases where livestock farmers experience cases of livestock worrying when there's no footpath in that field, because dogs can travel quite some distance. They've got excellent smelling abilities, dogs, and they will seek out stock if it's a particularly interesting smell or if it's unusual to them. And the increase in dogs in lockdown, and the dogs might not have been exposed to this sort of environment before, just because people might not have been able to travel, or they might be in the area on holiday, for example. There are lots of different scenarios where it simply is just safer to keep your dog on a lead.
Mm-hmm. I did wonder if there had been a rise in that sort of thing during lockdown, because we certainly know there's been an increase in demand for dogs in general and puppies. People are finding themselves at home more, so they're buying dogs and rescuing dogs, and which is wonderful. But obviously they're then coming to the countryside where they're not necessarily, I guess, walking on designated footpaths and letting a dog off a lead where it hasn't got the recall ability, perhaps. Is that a problem that's commonly being found?
Farmers are really, really open generally, and they love to be able to share their work they do. Really passionate community, and it's not that they don't want people to be out enjoying the landscape, but they have all noticed a drastic increase in the number of people accessing the countryside during COVID, and even after lockdown is easing, because people have seen and realised how wonderful it is to be out and about, which is fantastic for lots of health and mental health reasons, but it does bring with it an increased risk from dogs and livestock attacks.
No, absolutely. And I think our third video actually goes into that in some detail. But before we get to that, the sort of one of the other issues we have with the sort of dogs is, and maybe something that you've been concerned about, is dog theft. So I think we probably ought to address that sort of while we're here, because it's a thing we get quite a lot in terms of rural crime. And because there's been, my understanding is there's been a 115% increase in Google searches for buying a puppy as a result of lockdown. So you're seeing a lot more people with dogs, and unfortunately because of the demand, you're finding criminals are also stealing dogs to sell them on and to breed from them for a profit. It's something that we are aware of. It's not quite as prolific as you might see on social media. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a rumour mill, and there's a lot more concern than there is the cases that have been reported to us. And we are aware that that may be an anomaly. There may be more cases out there that haven't been reported to us, in which case please do tell us. If you are aware of a theft or an attempted theft, we need to know that. But in terms of keeping your dogs that you have newly rescued or sort of bought during lockdown safe, certainly from thefts, Holly, what would you advise, particularly how you can sort of keep your dog safe and at home with you?
I think training is really important to ensure that your dog's never out of sight. You know, you need to be able to see your dog at all times, which obviously helps with the livestock worrying as well. To make sure that they've got a tag on them, to make sure that there's a phone number, so if anyone finds your dog because it has run off for whatever reason, that they can phone that number. But if you are seeing these instances on social media, we're finding that often an incident is happening, and every time it's shared, something different is added to the story, and often it's not the same story as when it begun. So our reports of dogs being stolen have not increased as the perception has. So that we ask that if it is happening and we're not aware, please report it. Please report suspicious instances in car parks if someone's paying attention to your dog. We're more than happy to receive that call so we can submit the intel and look at the bigger picture, because that's what we want to do. Is there's obviously a bigger picture going on here, and it's really key that we understand that.
One thing I would like to sort of point out as well is one of the other questions that we did have asked to us a little while ago when we had a lot of questions around dog theft, was carrying something to use in terms of self-defence. The question we had was actually in relation to carrying a dye spray that you could use on someone. we please ask you do not carry anything that could be considered to be a weapon, because that could put you at risk of being arrested for an offence yourself. If you are concerned, please carry something like a personal safety alarm. I don't know if there's anything that you guys would like to add along those lines, but we had that raised to us, and although we completely understand your concerns and wanted to keep yourself and your dog safe, it's also important that you don't do anything which might bring you into trouble legally as well.
I'll talk a little bit about it and then I'll pass to Mr. Hodder. But for me, if you're not comfortable and if you're concerned about walking your dog and in certain areas, whether that may be at night time, I would just say avoid those times, those places, and go places where you feel comfortable. Go with someone else. Make sure you take your phone with you, things like that. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Obviously echo everything you've said. We completely understand the traumatic experience the loss of a dog can be to a family or to the owner, because like many dog owners, they're part of the family, and once they go missing, the unknown is really traumatic for people, so we recognise that. So that's why we encourage the reporting of it, and yeah, quite rightly, be sensible about your approach, and think about your own safety as well if something was to happen with your dog.
No, absolutely. We'll look at our third video now, which ties up our livestock worrying sort of section of this evening, which is a video of Stuart Roberts, the Deputy President of the NFU, who is also a landowner, sort of farmer, giving us their specific perspective on livestock worrying.
Over the last weekend, we've seen a significant increase in the number of incidents of dogs attacking livestock. In one incident alone in Wales on Saturday, 50 sheep died after a dog worrying incident. Now, I've said lots of times how I welcome people onto my farm, and I genuinely do. Farmers up and down the country like seeing people enjoying the countryside, but please remember to do so responsibly. Keep your dog on a lead if it's around livestock. Nobody wants to be responsible for their dog attacking farm livestock or wildlife. So please come out and enjoy the countryside, but do so responsibly. And please keep dogs under control.
I think that video is a really interesting way to round off our discussion about livestock worrying, seeing from a farmer's perspective just how emotional it can be. And as Romy has said before, farmers and landowners don't want to restrict your access to the countryside. If you've got a designated footpath to walk through, they would like you to enjoy the countryside, but it's just that question of doing it in a safe way and sort of not allowing that kind of damage to happen to your crops, to your animals, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and we saw in lockdown as well, increased access meant that footpaths got wider, people who weren't particularly au fait with following maps were often off the footpath, which can be a health and safety risk. If you're in a farmyard, there's lots of moving vehicles, and if those drivers aren't expecting to see a family having a picnic or wandering around, that can have some really big health and safety concerns. So farmers generally want people to stay on the footpath, enjoy the countryside. It's a managed landscape that they work really hard to achieve, and they just want people to be safe.
And actually, you raised a really interesting point with the picnicking and stuff. There's that issue of littering, and we certainly had last year a problem with wildfires, didn't we, where people had sort of maybe thrown a cigarette butt away outside of a car window or just dropped it in passing or left other litter, and it just, in hot conditions, you really do get that risk of fire, and that can be so damaging to crops and obviously to the wildlife and sort of everything around it, really. So we would really encourage, certainly if you're out in the countryside, to have that responsible attitude of taking everything home with you.
I think the interesting point is you're quite right that the countryside now is back open to everybody, and we're all enjoying it. And of course, Clarkson's farm on Amazon has really increased the profile of not only farmers but the countryside and landowners. So we're aware that it's getting more focus. So that's why we want to encourage the reporting and the joint working and the responsibility that we all have. The old countryside code is to consider when we're out there being respectful to our surroundings.
Yeah, to respect, protect and enjoy the countryside, which is something we put in a lot of our messaging, certainly online, to try and help sort of stick that in your mind, because we all enjoy the countryside. We're all sort of country lovers, or we live within the country, and we like going out there and enjoying it too. But it's about protecting the wildlife, about protecting the livelihood of the people who live and work within the rural community, and just being responsible while doing it. So we've had a question in from Leanne on Facebook, who asks, could we consider making it compulsory for people to microchip their dogs? I believe it already is compulsory, and there are certain databases you have to register your dog with, but I'm going to hand over to Holly to go into more detail on that one.
Yeah, not a huge amount of detail, but it is under legislation that you must have your dog microchipped. When you purchase a dog or a puppy, if you have a certain amount of time to change the microchip details, it's really quite simple. Depending on the company which is registered to, you can go online, change the details, and it's as simple as that. It is really important that we do that, because if we do find a dog and we scan it and we have the details of the owner, for us to return them to you, we need to make sure it's the right owner. So if it's not your details and you're claiming that you're the owner, we have to try and work out whether you're the legitimate owner. That would all be dealt with if the right details were on the chips. And in the world at the moment, where lots of dogs are being purchased and puppies are being purchased, we want to make sure that we're giving them back to legitimate owners. So please make sure your microchip details are kept up to date.
And I also raised an interesting point in the break when the video was on about other animals need microchips as well, which was something that was new to me, particularly horses and other livestock. So Mike, were you able to go into a bit more?
Well, I'm not the expert.
Spot,
I think
but,
our NFU colleague will be able
absolutely.
to clarify
I'd
that.
really pleased to, yeah.
Yeah, so all cattle in the UK have got an ear tag and a passport, and they can be tracked and traced throughout their whole life, so we know where they've been for how long, and from that you can work out which other animals they were with. That's got really good traceability and animal health and welfare implications. And if you see cattle out in a field, you'll often see they've got a yellow tag in their ear, and that's what that is. Similarly for sheep, they have to have an ear tag in their ear if they want to be sold or moved on, and they're slightly more advanced than cattle, and they're electronic, so you can scan them with a magic wand and it will tell you everything you need to know about that sheep.
But I think that's really important, because that links into more rural crime where you can see livestock being stolen, and that's just an indication of how important livestock is to a farmer or a landowner, and how easily we can trace if it is stolen.
So rustling and livestock theft isn't something I've been particularly aware of in Surrey, but I wondered, is that particularly a sort of a problem nationwide at the moment? Is that something that the NFU has had a lot of reports on recently, or is that...
It's definitely something that happens, very unfortunately. I don't know if you've had any predominantly substantial cases in Surrey in recent years, but we do hear about it happening, and it is really distressing for farmers, because they want to make sure their animals have the best quality of life, and unfortunately the assumption is that if they're stolen, the person who's stolen them probably isn't thinking about the welfare of those animals primarily. We're not sure why people steal the stock from the field. Presumably it's for consumption, because it would be really very difficult to sell on animals because of the passport and the ear tag system. But again, the not knowing is as worrying, like with the dog theft and the puppy theft. As an owner who's reared that animal, you want to make sure it's got the best quality of life and the best death possible. And where they find remains of in-field killings, or that the stock are all gone completely, that's really distressing for farmers.
Yeah. No one wants that. It's like you say, you spent a long time bringing these animals up in a healthy environment, and even if they are working animals, you have that attachment to them and want to sort of, it's horrible to think that they've been taken unlawfully. We do have a few more questions around dogs. Kev Hall on Facebook has asked whether we can encourage vets to tell dog owners to update their chip details when they move house. I mean, absolutely, but I would say it's not necessarily the vet's job to kind of enforce that, and the owner's responsibility is to update when you move house, or if you were to sell a dog, that you should be keeping those chip details up to date as a part of your own personal responsibility. But I'm sure vets do put that reminder out there.
Just to add to that, if I was to come across a vet within a case or a situation, I would kind of push that message as well. So although it is down to the owner's responsibility, we're always happy to push that message out where we can to whoever that professional may be, a vet or otherwise.
And the other question linked to microchips as well is from Saskia Smith on Facebook. I've heard that chips can be removed by dog snatchers. Is this a problem in Surrey? So this is something we've heard about in terms of intelligence, but I'm not sure. Again, Michael Holly might be able to go into more detail how much of an issue this is in Surrey itself. Are you two aware of this as a problem that we have, or?
It sounds horrific, doesn't it, that people would remove a chip, because to do that you've obviously got to cut the skin to get the chip out. There are criminal gangs that have been known to do that. We haven't seen a lot of it locally. But yes, it's a thing. But don't forget, criminal gangs are working on a profit, and they're not caring, whether it be livestock or whether it be dogs, about the care and welfare of the animal. So that's why it's key that we all take our personal responsibility to update our details of our beloved dog or pet to ensure that we can track them as best we can. And it's our responsibility as the police to ensure that we arrest any offenders or criminal gangs that are doing that barbaric treatment.
Absolutely. So I wondered if we could change tactic and talk about a few other rural sort of crimes that we either have in Surrey or that are a problem nationwide. Romy, what are the sort of things that farmers and landowners are coming to the NFU and saying, this is a particular problem for me at the moment?
We see, and I know Holly's had lots of these cases, what could be described as petty theft. So breaking in and taking items that can be easily lifted up, so chainsaws, trimmers, small bits of kit that are easily sold on with very little traceability. That's one particularly strong market because it's quite hard to prove kit belongs to somebody else, especially once it's left the holding. So we try and encourage people to identify their possessions in a way that they would know it was theirs, and it would be quite difficult to remove. But we also get much more organised thefts of things like quad bikes, diggers, and there was last year a bit of a spate of GPS theft, which is kit that goes on top of tractors and helps it navigate the field. If you've watched Jeremy Clarkson, you'll know how important that is. And when those bits of kit are stolen, people can't go to work, and farming is very time sensitive, which can mean that crops can't get harvested, tractors can't drill crop into the ground. Again, unfortunately, those bits of kit are very hard to trace. They're not cheap, can be several tens of thousands into the hundreds of thousands of pounds, and that's a much more targeted, calculated type of theft, which we have seen in the region in the last 2 years.
I'd like to point out we're not sponsored by Jeremy Clarkson or Clarkson's Farm. Other farming programmes are available, but it's worth a watch. So yeah, no, absolutely. And those tractor GPS thefts are something which has certainly come back into our radar recently. And like you say, the sheer cost, you wouldn't, if you're not a farmer, if you're not part of the rural community, you may not know that it's such a crucial part of farming in general, especially in the harvest season at the moment. And certainly the reports we've had, not only are sort of thieves removing the GPS itself, but they're also cutting the wires inside the cab, which adds an extra cost to the farmers. Not only are they replacing the unit, but they're also having to rewire the tractors. And it's such a crucial time of the harvest where everything can just sort of, it's so time critical. It's a really significant crime. I don't know if you guys want to talk more about that as well from what we've had recently.
Yeah, just to touch on that really, that that type of crime affects everyone because it's all about producing food for the country, and if our farmers can't do that because of some equipment that's been taken, whether you're invested in rural crime or rural communities, it is going to affect you as a person. So it's really important that we try and deliver the service that's deserved for that subject.
Yeah, we've experienced it locally, and I say we've experienced it, and I mean a local resident has experienced it, and our policing response has moved on because of that particular incident. There was some learning for us, which we have taken on board, and we're working with the farmer to try and recover that equipment. What I would ask is that personal responsibility that we've spoken about in other areas. We've all got responsibility to protect what we can. We have a responsibility to you as the public to investigate and bring evidence before the courts and arrest those offenders. What I would really help like your help with is just reviewing your own personal security, looking at those sheds, those farm equipments that you've got out, and just giving yourself a little bit of reflection on, are you doing the best to protect that equipment in the first instance? And we've got design out crime officers that are helpful and will come out to your location to give you some guidance. And I know the NFU do that as well.
Yeah, it's something that we really try to hammer home to members, because prevention is so much better than cure. And putting livestock information signs up in fields to let dog walkers know that there's stock in that field is one step you can take to protect yourself against a livestock worrying incident. But even around your own farm and your farmyard, get somebody else to have a look around, because they might see a risk that you've become oblivious to because you're there every day. Looking at CCTV options. I know it's not always possible because of the wiring, but there's some really good low cost options in terms of wildlife trail cameras, which don't need to be hardwired. If you put those in your high risk spots, they're going to give you more coverage than if you don't have anything. Locking your sheds, taking your keys out your vehicles, all those things that seem so obvious in hindsight. If you walk around your farm with a sort of health and safety crime prevention hat on, you'll see probably 10 things you could implement without even really trying that hard. And it's something we really, really encourage people to do, because once you've had your kit stolen, once you've had a livestock worrying attack, once you've been broken into, it's so upsetting and it's so much work to try and rectify that, you know, you'd be kicking yourself if you didn't try and do something in advance.
And we're happy if you need any help with that, please contact us, and we'll come out either with our docos, the design out crime officers, or myself, Laura, or the PCSOs. We're more than happy to advise.
And I think just to cover that one point about personal responsibility kind of spans what we're talking about tonight. So as a local resident, I know that Steve Conisbee, for example, in Polesden Lacey, will put up signs about livestock being in fields. So he's giving us an indication that actually I've got livestock in there. Pop your dog on a lead. And it's our responsibility as dog walkers and dog owners just to take notice. I mean, Steve Conisbee, and I know others across the county do it, but his signs are accurate, and if it says no livestock, there is no livestock. But if it says livestock, then there is, and that's where I talk about personal responsibility. And I think if the farmer and landowner is giving us a heads up, we've got no excuse.
No, absolutely. And like I said, we are more than happy to have officers come out to speak to you about these measures, because we're aware that in some instances the deck is slightly stacked against you. For example, with plant machinery, I'm aware that a lot of makes and models share the same sort of key system, like say keys, same locks. So if you had the key to one, you might be able to access several. In which case we'd recommend you sort of do things like marking valuable property, like your GPS systems, like things that you think are likely to be stolen, with identifying markers. So your initials, something in paint or in UV that will stand out, that will make it unattractive to be sold on, because a lot of these parts are being sold online or sold abroad, and if you have a means of marking it as your own, it also marks it as stolen if it's not with you in your farm. So something like that is a cheap and relatively easy way to try and keep your property marked, and to try and get around those things which make it harder to protect your land.
Just to touch on that as
Yes,
well.
of course.
Sophie.
No, of course.
With a recent investigation, we found that actually a lot of the serial numbers aren't being noted down. So when we record it on our system as stolen, there's no identifying details whatsoever. So if you could quickly take a picture of anything that's identifiable about that machinery, or if you are etching initials, for example, onto the machinery, take a picture so that if we do find and locate machinery, we can contact you guys, and we've got that picture and we can match it up, and it makes it a lot easier.
One of the other topics, we're changing topic again here, but on something which is, I know it affects a lot of sort of landowners and farmers, and is a real nuisance in general to everybody, is fly tipping. And it's something that is a bit controversial because of who deals with it. So a question we often get is, someone keeps fly tipping on my land, why aren't the police doing anything about it? And in terms of a police response, it's my understanding, and I will be corrected if I'm wrong, that we turn out to fly tipping if it's happening there and then. That is when the police can attend and hopefully try and catch someone in the act and deal with them appropriately. if it's already happened, it's something that should still be reported, certainly to the local council, is my understanding, but there's a limit to what we can do once the materials have actually already been dumped. I know it's something that you have experience with.
Really frustrating, and the impact of fly tipping on a landowner is massive, because the cost of removing that, especially if there's fridges, asbestos, is massive and falls upon the landowner. So we do have a role to play, absolutely. Again, can I ask for your help? If you're getting your skip cleared, consider who's taking it, and if you're paying really cheaply for the removal of your rubbish, just have conscience about where that's going to go. Have you asked them for their waste carrier's licence? Do you know if they're a genuine removal company for certain waste? So a bit of help will be really appreciated. It's a joint agency approach. For those that suffered, what they want is action, and I can go into the differences about who owns what, environmental, health, trading standards, the police, the local authority. Everybody has a part to play, and we certainly have to do a lot more. We were discussing with the NFU about waste carrier licence checks, and that's a great way for us in our role to be part of the solution to fly tipping.
I imagine this must be a really frustrating issue for farmers and landowners, and probably something you guys get quite a lot at the NFU.
Yeah, and we were talking about it earlier, and the main deterrent is the waste carrier licence fines, and so we try to join multi-agency operations where we can to raise the awareness of the importance of those when people are disposing of their rubbish. But also it's important that farmers protect themselves. If you leave your gates open, if you can put up cameras to try and monitor high risk areas, to provide as much evidence as possible to those investigations, and again, report. If there's no data to say that this is happening, then the chances of the situation ever changing or more support being provided legislatively becomes really low. So even if you feel like you're not getting a fantastic response from your council or from the Environment Agency, keep reporting, keep telling us, keep involving the police if it's a live case, because if we don't paint an accurate picture, there's just no way we'll ever be able to substantially make the case that this is completely unsustainable.
Can I just follow on from that? And really, you're absolutely right, the reporting is key. And if you see those vans or pickup trucks or anything in and around your community and you're suspicious of what is going on, then do use Crime Stoppers 0800 555 111, because Crime Stoppers will accept that intelligence and pass it to not only the NFU, the local authority, but the police, but will pass it out. And it might just be that that's part of the jigsaw that helps us target that particular vehicle, and that might save that one farmer or landowner quite a massive cost, not only to remove the waste, but unable to use it for either livestock or planting of vegetables or corn or other things. I've nearly lost and whatever else is planted, because although I've watched Clarkson's farm, I am not a farmer.
You've got the big ones.
Yeah, all right. Got those. But yeah, really, the intelligence picture, as we've discussed, is really key. And I know you might think it's probably nothing, but let us have the full picture, and we can work out whether it's important, because that bit of intelligence about that one vehicle you've seen in your community lots of times with lots of rubbish on, and then it comes back empty moments later, could be quite vital.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that actually ties in nicely with the question we've had from Sue on Facebook, which is what's the best way to contact Surrey Police about any of these issues? And she mentioned specifically online or call 101, and we have a variety of ways you can contact us. Obviously, in an emergency, it's always 999. If you suspect anyone is in immediate danger or might be, please always call us on 999. It's not an inconvenience. If it isn't an emergency, we can sort that out in our contact centre. So we'd always rather that you be safe rather than sorry. In terms of reporting something maybe non-urgent, you can call 101, but we have a lot of online ways in which you can report to us as well, if that is more convenient to you. If you're on social media, you can direct message us through our Facebook and our Twitter pages. Someone from our contact centre is on hand to monitor all the messages that come in. And our website, the Surrey Police website, which you can find through a Google search, also offers a live chat function and reporting online. So you can fill in a form online to report issues to us, and they will be passed on and come to our offices. There's also, if you don't wish to speak to police, which we understand not everybody does, you may have had a bad experience, or you may be just concerned about the repercussions of reporting anything to us, Crime Stoppers is always a good reserve option. You can call them on 0800 555 111, and they're an independent charity from us. You'll be completely anonymous. I think you can also report online. Are there other ways that your members report to you through the NFU?
We, as Holly mentioned, tend to pick up cases if people have an ongoing case and they're perhaps a bit confused about where the case is going or what their options are as a victim. We tend to get involved in those cases and to explain our experience of how those cases pan out elsewhere. But yes, we're very happy for members to follow up with us if they have an ongoing case and they're not sure about where they stand legally. But we have also had really good feedback from farmers and landowners about reporting to Surrey Police through your social media. That's not the case in all counties, and everyone's got a horror story about how long they spent on 101. So we're really pleased that actually in Surrey it's really easy for people to report crimes. You can pop the information in on a Facebook chat, you get a crime reference number in exactly the same way as you would if it was over the phone. It's just much quicker, much more convenient, especially when you're out and about and on the go, which farmers very often are.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we are moments away from what may be your favourite part of this evening, which is our Dog of the Week video. But just before that, just brief final comments from anybody on the panel as to anything you would like our audience to take away with them tonight. So if we start with you, Mike, down the end.
It's important, I think, that you know that we recognise we've got more to do, and that's why we're reaching out to you to help us to increase that reporting and let us know through our elected officials, the Police and Crime Commissioner, your local county councillors or your district and parish councillors, because we all work together. We want to provide you that service. That's what we're here for. But we know we've got work to do, but we want to work with you on it.
Anything to add, Holly?
I would just add to please report everything and anything. I'd rather you report something that may not be of use to us, but I'd rather you report it so that we know about it and we can decide whether it is of use. So please don't ever feel like you're bothering us. Please also report things that even you may think we won't be able to do anything with it. It's really important that we still know about it. Like Romy said, it all adds up in the figures. We can then put that forward and say this and this is happening. Let's put some more resources into a certain area. So even if we can't do anything about it because there's no suspect, etc., we really, really want to know about it. Just last thing, if you do experience any issues with reporting, officers not understanding what kind of offence it is, please contact myself and Laura via the live chat or 101, and we'll happily look into that specific issue ourselves and decide if we could have done better or actually if the service was acceptable. Thank you.
Romy, any closing thoughts from you?
Just absolutely echo what Holly's just said. Report, report, report. We'll never get tired of saying that to our members. If you've got questions that you want to ask generally about rural crime that isn't specific to a case, the NFU are always here from a legal perspective and from a member's perspective, just for a bit of support. And if you wanted any of the resources that we've mentioned in terms of livestock worrying signs or livestock information signs, we've got a heap of resources online for NFU members and downloadable products for non-NFU members, all on our website, which we'd really encourage people to use because they've gone down really well with walkers, farmers, landowners, everyone in the countryside, and they are free.
Perfect. That's what everyone likes to hear. Wonderful. So we'll sign off for now. Thank you so much for watching this evening and tuning in and asking your questions. We are running a rural crime survey until the end of August, so if you have concerns or thoughts that you want to send to us, the link will be put in the chat by 7 o'clock. So please do get in touch. We want to hear from you. And now it's on to everyone's favourite slot, Dog of the Week.
I'm Vicky, I'm a police dog handler with Surrey. This is PD Sina. We had our course in August last year, so we've been together for a year now, but out operationally for 9 months. And we cover Western, so like Guildford, Hazelmere, Camberley, all that area, but obviously we go Surrey and Sussex. I've had Sina since July of last year, and our course started in the August, so about a year me and Sina have been together, and before I had her, she was a family pet for 18 months. So yeah, but the drive is so high that she's always going to be a working dog, and that's what her old owners said, was that, look, she'll be better in a working environment, and that's why obviously she came to Surrey Police as a gift dog, and yeah, she's doing really well, and she is loving life as a working dog, so they definitely made the right choice. So when I get up in the morning, I'll let Sina out into the garden because she lives outside in her kennel. We will go on a walk in the morning, give her a good run. I'll get changed, and as soon as I put my stab vest on, Sina's behaviour changes completely. She's like, okay, I'm going into work mode. And it is crazy how they definitely have a rest day mode and a work mode, just like we do. The dogs do as well. And then we'll get in the van and we'll start our shift. And yeah, that can range from tracking to find people, building searches, looking for items of property people have dropped, suspects and missing people, public order. So we work Guildford, so we get a lot of the nightlife on Friday and Saturdays, like crowd control and stuff like that, which is great for Sina because obviously Sina's only been out since COVID, so now everything's starting to open up again. It's seeing Sina's confidence grow because there's more people in the town, and it's nice watching her confidence grow, really. She's lovely, she's got a really high drive, she loves to work. I believe some dogs need a job, so Sina definitely needs a job, she's definitely not a pet. She loves tracking, searching, that sort of stuff. Obviously loves playing with her toys. Sina's favourite toy is a ragger. Sina, what's this? Yes, good girl. Everything the dogs do is for a reward. So the reason why we have toys is for their motivation, for a positive result. So for example, at the end of a track, if there's not always someone to hide for you, you can leave a toy. So they're still getting that reward at the end. So everything they do is to motivate them for a reward, and the toy is basically their treat. So the reason we're in this woods is the last time we were here, we were called to a vulnerable female who'd gone missing in these woods. So paramedics have gone to her house to deal with her for a mental health issue, and basically she had no mental capacity, but she'd ran off from the ambulance, and it was a completely different day to today. It was really heavy rain, it was dark, it was 10 o'clock at night, so you can imagine these woods were just pitch black by the time we got there. So the paramedics couldn't see her in the woods where she'd gone. So we got here, I asked them, where's the last time you saw her? And they said, okay, she's gone that way. So I put the harness on, her tracking harness. Now the tracking harness is like a trigger to Sina. Okay, we're going tracking now. So then we started tracking. She picked up the track through the woods. But we did a loop back on ourselves, so we came back here. So I decided, okay, we'll just free search the woods. And that's when we searched for about a good 40 minutes. And then Sina shot down and we found her. She was just walking around barefoot, really wet. We were really concerned for her safety, not just because of the lacking her mental capacity, but also it was really cold, really dark. She was in bare feet. So, but I was really proud of Sina. 40 minutes we were searching, and Sina kept going, kept the motivation high, the drive to work. So yeah, and it was really nice for Sina to have a positive result at the end of that 40 minutes.